Hey everybody, welcome to Breakfast All Day. Matt, Christy, Alonso. Jim Jarmusch has an all-star art house film in theaters, but it's also a movie about zombies. Go figure. The dead don't die. Do you want me to?
Sure.
Sure, why not? Okay, so apparently there's been global fracking, and it's been...
fracking.
It's on the polar ice
Polar
caps.
fracking, correct.
Polar
Fracking.
Damn polar bears.
It's a thing.
So polar fracking has been happening, and it's thrown the Earth off of its axis, and so naturally what happens is the dead come back to life. And we are mainly seeing what's happening in a place called Centerville, which is somewhere near Pittsburgh, which is appropriate because there's a lot of Night of the Living Dead shout-outs in this movie. And the local police are played by Bill Murray, Adam Driver, and Chloë Sevigny. There are town folks played by Danny Glover and Caleb Landry Jones, and there are zombies played by Iggy Pop and Sarah Driver and Carol Kane, and Selena Gomez comes driving into town in a really cool old car, and the local oddball...
Hermit Bob.
What?
Hermit Bob,
yes, is Tom Waits. Tilda Swinton is the local oddball mortician from Scotland. Yeah, so this is arguably Jim Jarmusch's first satire. It's definitely his first genre movie. And he's basically trying to make a point in a fairly unsubtle way about how we are responding or not responding to climate change.
May I raise my hand?
Oh, yes. What?
Is Only Lovers Left Alive not a genre movie?
Yeah, I was just thinking that's a vampire movie.
Okay, yes. I mean, if you think that vampires are inherently genre, I mean, I don't, because that's not a horror film so much as it's a meditation about like, what would one do with immortality and how many books could you read?
But they're vampires and they got to drink blood. And stuff.
Okay, fine.
This is a total lark. I mean, superficially, tonally, in terms of what actually happens from moment to moment, it's just a big old goof. It's a big old meta, self-referential goof. At points in time, characters refer to the theme song of the movie, and they talk about the script. They talk about the pages that they
there's
saw.
There's an argument over who got to read.
Script.
Right. I love that there's an argument over who got to read the full script and who didn't.
I'm not sure that I love that. And I usually am a fan of things that know that they're things. Like there's one of my favorite books from when Nick was a kid is called We're in a Book.
Right.
Elephant and Piggy, and they know they're in a book. It's genius. I'm all for that. If it's like a running conceit. Here they kind of dip their toe into it here and there in ways that are kind of jarring.
Yeah, this movie is trying to do several things, and I don't know that it does any of them all that well. Like, I think as a message movie, it's kind of overblown. I think that it's not scary, even though it's using horror trappings. It's not funny, even though it has that sort of Jarmushy deadpan and pauses and the self-referential stuff that you're referring to. So after a while, it just kind of felt like, well, it almost feels like either somebody bet Jim Jarmusch that he couldn't make a zombie movie, or like he's got somebody to send through college who's like, how can I make a lot of money and still make a movie that looks like one of mine?
I disagree that it's not funny, because I did laugh quite a bit. And I noticed that I was laughing because I was the only person in my theater when I saw it yesterday at 4:00 at the ArcLight in El Segundo. And so I could hear my laughter, my shrill cackle bouncing off the walls. I laughed out loud quite a bit at just some of the absurdity of individual lines, individual moments. It is funny, but it also is kind of languid, the way that a lot of Jim Jarmusch films are. And if you are a fan of his movies, this is like an all-star Who's Who kind of like Love Boat version of a Jim Jarmusch movie, because you've got Tilda Swinton, who was in Only Lovers Left Alive. You got Bill Murray, right? And Bill Murray was in Broken Flowers and in Coffee and Cigarettes. The RZA is in it, with a Wu-Tang joke. I mean, he was in Coffee and Cigarettes.
Adam Driver was in Patterson.
Right. So, playing a guy named Peterson. His officer's name is Peterson. I mean, all over the place. And then Iggy Pop is one of the zombies. There's an entire Iggy Pop documentary that Jim Jarmusch did. So if you are into his films and you just want to hang out with these people for a while, that like part's fun.
Other indie director people that he clearly is
Larry Fessenden.
Right. Is Sarah Driver. Like this movie feels like, what happens when you get a bunch of jazz musicians together, a bunch of musicians, and everybody just kind of riffs, and like some of it's pretty fun and some of it's just like them noodling around. And that's kind of what this felt like. There's moments in here that I thought were really funny. Like when the theory about what happened in the diner that everybody keeps repeating the same lines, that's kind of funny, right? And then, there's a bunch of like little goofs in there. I saw it at a nearly empty theater and I was laughing out loud early on, but then of the four of us that were in the theater, I was the only one laughing. And so then I was embarrassed.
Did all four of you stay for the entirety?
I stayed to the credits, but then when the credits left,
I just didn't know if like the people who were also in the theater,
everybody stayed there.
Everybody else, did they stay?
I went opening weekend and there was a decent amount of people in the theater, but like people weren't responding particularly strongly to it.
Well, I'm not sure that it's a particularly strongly
reaction
kind of film.
That's
maybe
certainly
that's
true.
part of it too. Is just that it's all so understated.
The thing that it reminded me of, kind of like your jazz theory, is Alex Cox, after making Repo Man and Sid and Nancy, which were huge hits and very hip cult movies, made this movie called Straight to Hell, where basically it's like a bunch of the actors from his films and like rock
and
buddies.
The Clash.
And the Clash, like Elvis Costello has a cameo as like a mute butler, like Courtney Love, all these people are in it, and they're all like basically they go to Spain where they shot a bunch of the spaghetti westerns.
Right, the riff from Paper Planes comes from the Straight to Hell song.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it is such a wank. Like it is such a navel gazing, aren't we clever movie that's kind of pointless. And I went back and looked it up, and guess who's one of the people who has a cameo in Straight to Hell?
Jim Jarmusch.
Jim Jarmusch. So this is Jim Jarmusch's Straight to Hell, except that Jim Jarmusch was already in Straight to Hell.
But again, if you like that kind of thing, as we like to say around here, you'll like that
this kind of thing.
If you like all these people and you want to hang out with them, it's fun.
I generally do. I mean, like I'm not a huge Jarmusch fan, but I loved Patterson. I liked quite a few of his films, and I'm all about let's talk about the fact that we're all ignoring the environment, which the movie does. I think have some ideas in its head about like how there's this awful thing happening all around and nobody wants to deal with it. Like Chloë Sevigny's deputy is literally like, could you just tell me it's going to be okay, even if it's not? Please tell me it's going to be okay. And I think that's sort of when we read these stories every day about like Harvard scientist says we have 5 years to start reversing things or we're totally fucked. I think at some point we're just all like numb to it all because there's no traction to like changing anything in the current system that we're in. Not even about political parties, just in the chokehold that oil companies have over our lives. So yes, metaphorically, I'm on board for what this movie has to say. I just don't think it's very interesting.
And then you have the Steve Buscemi character who was wearing some kind of like MAGA hat. It says
Keep
something
America
else.
white again.
Right, keep America white again.
It's a red baseball cap. It's clearly a MAGA hat, sort of. But again, he's just like a symbol. They don't do anything but put a MAGA hat on him and put a gun in his hands to show that he's like a right-wing asshole. They don't do anything with that.
Right. Clearly people showed up and only had a few days worth of shooting. And it's, this goes back to what Siskel would talk about is like, is this movie more interesting than watching the cast sit around and eat dinner? And I think, and having a dinner conversation, I think this movie is just a hair better than that. It just barely passes that, but only just. And it's kind of like, oh, that was an interesting dinner party until somebody got really political at the end. And it's like, yeah, that was a fun time, but we need to not let Tom drink so much because then he goes off.
I really liked Adam Driver the whole way through, though, because he just has such a perfect bit of timing and just the delivery of all of his
the way he says
lines.
the word ghouls is funny.
But then again, like, okay, it's Adam Driver. We know who Adam Driver is. They have to throw a totally stupid Star Wars joke in there.
Yes, thank you. I forgot about that.
It made me roll my eyes. Like, I wasn't like, oh, ha, that was clever. Like, maybe there's a clever way to get a Star Wars reference in there, but that wasn't not it.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, I don't know. I thought that was fine. Because I think anything else could have been like really bonkers. I thought that
then
was.
Don't do it.
I thought that.
Don't do it at all. Why not?
We know who he is.
Listen, as far as weird stuff that just happens to show up in this movie, that is by far and away not the weirdest.
Oh, it's not weird. It's just
right, like or just
extraneous.
Unnecessary,
Yeah,
like extraneous, right? Like the whole thing that happens with Tilda Swinton. It's like, what?
Although
right? Like,
I think that kind of makes sense.
I think it confirms what we've always thought about Tilda Swinton.
Yeah,
sure.
That's why.
Sure.
That's perhaps why I think that is what
right.
happens.
But
to
again,
her.
it's a lot of like, right. Yes.
Also, by that point in the movie, I'm just kind of like, can we just
Whatever.
end now?
But it also, like, again, it feels like a collection of scenes and there's not really any through line, right? Because one of the challenges with this movie is, for instance, like, there's early on, she says to the corpses, stay put, right? As a joke that a mortician would say, right? And then later there's a surprise she seems to have when they're actually up and moving around, and yet she's also been training with the samurai sword, right?
Yeah.
And, like, it's a weird, like, again, it's like, it feels like, oh, this would be fun to like put somebody who just trains with a samurai sword who happens to be in one of these movies.
Okay, but even that whole thing was sort of like, is he trolling people who got mad that she played the Ancient One in Doctor Strange? Is he commenting on the fact that he used all this samurai imagery in Ghost Dog?
Oh, I thought it was a Ghost Dog reference.
Maybe, right?
I wasn't sure. I didn't. That part I wasn't. That was at least one thing. I was like, okay, I don't even know where we're going with this one. But you're raising a lot of uncomfortable specters here. You know,
but
about
also
cultural appropriation.
Yeah, but the machete does become very useful
No,
sure.
Yeah, I got it. But it's just again
as
like,
a weapon.
You have
Sure.
to kill the head.
Sure, but again, it just feels like a bunch of not even scenes, like a bunch of like moments, kind of just like, hey, let's do this. This will be fun. And again, kind of interesting to watch. It's not rush out and see. It's, you know, sure, like you get a lot of mileage out of these. Again, it just barely passes the Siskel test.
If nothing else, I think it's always good to remind people whenever you see a cast list, you think, oh, with a cast like this, how bad can it be? Don't ask that question. We've all been burned at least once on that.
And the
one.
reality is because you can get a cast that big when you're only asking them to do a day or two of shooting.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah,
so
go watch New Year's Eve or whatever that awful
so when
Gary Marshall movie. You know,
let that be a lesson to all of us. Like when the ask is not that big for what the cast has to do, then it's like it's the ROI of their time, right? The return on investment. Like, oh well, if I only have to do a couple of days of this, then okay, fine.
And Jim's an old friend,
right? And Jim's an old friend,
Sure.
as opposed to like, oh, this isn't really good enough to sign up for 8 weeks of shooting, right? Like that's
in middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere.
I think it was like upstate New York.
and as Bill Murray says, they probably only just read their scenes anyway.
Maybe that wasn't a joke.
Yeah.
Maybe it's actually how it
Indeed
went
not.
down. All right, so my number is a 6. Like I had enough fun here and there.
a 6.
All right,
I gave it a 5 for sort of baseline competence, but I was kind of bored, and it all felt a little precious, and I was disappointed.
And the theme song will be in your head for a while.
No,
No, it
not
won't.
me.
It was stuck in my head. So our number's a 5.7. It's at 53% on the tomato meter. So maybe catch up with it when it's on Netflix or whatever.
But hey, if you haven't seen Patterson, see Patterson.
Oh, yeah.
It's so good.
See Broken Flowers.
Indeed.
See the dead don't die.
Well, hey, thanks for watching. Like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us at BeFastAllDay on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and do go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/linoleumknife. That's where we do our TV recaps. Right now, we are talking about Handmaid's Tale on Hulu and HBO's Big Little Lies, and I think we're gonna maybe start on the Roger Ailes show on Showtime. Maybe
We should.
Yeah, I think we should too. And we'll be, it's where we talk about movie trailers and movie news, and we'll be offering up reviews of classic films. And if you're at a $5 level, you get to pick which film we talk about when we do our surveys to ask you to pick one. So lots of things to take a look for, and we appreciate your support if you've already joined, and if you haven't, maybe you'll want to. Anyway, thanks so much. We'll see you next time. Bye.